can fly by airfoil. Airfoil is a shape of the plane that will control how the plane goes. And the planes have elevator, aileron, and rudder. The rudder will make the plane yaw, and the elevator will make the plane pitch, and the aileron will make the plane roll. And also the planes have lift, drag, thrust, and weight, which will make the plane go down, and the lift will make the plane go up, drag will make go backward, and thrust will make go forward.
How do massive airplanes fly? Some of the largest commercial airliners can weigh over 1 million pounds. Compare that to today's heaviest flying bird, the great bustard, which weighs just around 35 pounds. Despite their differences, these two behemoths rely on the same principles of flight. Flight is basically a battle against Earth's gravity, and your greatest ally is the air. Birds and planes alike fight gravity by manipulating the air molecules around them. When birds flap their wings, they're generating an area of high air pressure under the wing and low air pressure above it. The same happens when planes race down the runway. The pressure difference above and below the wing creates a net upward force, giving the aircraft lift. Once this upward force exceeds gravity's downward pull, you have liftoff. Of course, a 1 million pound plane needs greater lift to get off the ground than a great bustard. Planes achieve this with a combination of two things. One, airplanes race down the runway at 150 to 180 miles per hour, creating fast-moving air across the wings. And two, something called the angle of attack. You probably noticed that planes tilt up at liftoff instead of rising parallel to the ground. The reason is that the tilt, also known as the angle of attack, directs more air below the wing. This increases the pressure and gives the plane an extra boost. Once aloft, the main thing keeping the plane in midair isn't magic, it's the engines. Engines propel the plane forward, keeping a steady flow of fast-moving air across the wings. This creates that key difference in air pressure that supports the plane's weight against gravity. But as you fly higher, the air becomes thinner, so the plane must travel faster to maintain that lift. While liftoff speed is around 170 miles per hour at sea level, a commercial airliner's cruising speed is around 550 miles per hour at 40,000 feet, where the air density is 10 times thinner. But a thinner atmosphere means less drag on the aircraft, so the engines can hit high speeds with less fuel. Cruising altitudes between 35 to 40,000 feet are the sweet spot, where pilots can fly as fast as possible while burning the least amount of fuel. Each day, more than 2.5 million people in the US hop on a plane, taking to the sky the same way birds have been doing for millennia. Consider that the next time you're given a safety lesson on how to fasten your seatbelt.
Airplanes fly as the result of Bernoulli's principle, which says that if air speeds up, the pressure thus a wing generates lift because the air goes faster over the top, creating a region of low pressure and thrust load.
Airplanes have really big engines that help them fly. But the jet engines are not the reason why planes fly. Airplane wings are shaped to make the air move faster over top of the wing. Because the air moves faster, the air pressure on top of the wing is lower than the air pressure below the wing. The pressure from the top of the wing pushes the air downward behind the wing, creating downwash. The difference in pressure and the downwash creates lift, which makes airplanes fly. So it's all about the air, and air works on paper airplanes just like it works on real planes.
Sir Boss, we know how airplanes fly.
Yeah, there's like these forces in the universe.
Thrust is the force that pushes planes forward.
Drag is the force that wants to make them stop.
Weight is the force pulling them down.
And lift is the force that pushes them up.
Pushes them up! Against what? There's nothing underneath them!
But there is. They're called air molecules.
You can't see them, but they're all around us, man.
And the shape of the wings makes more air molecules go beneath them than above them.
Those air molecules smush together and push the plane up.
And when the force of lift is greater than the weight of the plane, that's how airplanes fly.
Just give me that tape.
When there's a push or a pull on an object's course, that's a force. And therefore we've got to identify. If you want to know how airplanes fly, they're thrust, drag, weight, and lift. Thrust, drag, weight, and lift. Thrust is the force of forward motion, and move forward you will, as long as you overcome the force of drag that can keep you standing still. The other part is the upward part, which starts with the shape of the wings. If you compare the air above and beneath them, you'll find a big difference between them. The air on bottom gets all bunched up, creating pressure, while the air on top speeds quickly along, so its force on the wing is lesser. That creates a force called lift, which lifts you off the ground, as long as it's stronger than the force of weight pulling you down.
The Wright brothers, the first successful airplane, 1903. Wilbur Wright was born on April 16, 1867, in Millville, Indiana, and Orville Wright was born on August 19, 1871, in Dayton, Ohio. Both brothers were pioneers credited with inventing the first airplane. In late 1901, the Wright brothers had gathered the aerodynamic data they needed to build a successful flying machine, and in 1902, the Wright brothers had built their latest glider based on this data. They had identified a wing shape that was efficient, producing the expected lift, and engineered controls that were responsive. The glider would also use a trailing rudder for yaw, therefore enabling the Wright brothers to navigate in the air in all three dimensions. Following this success, the next stage for the brothers was powered flight. No manufacturers could provide an engine light enough and powerful enough for their needs, so the brothers had to design and build their own. The Flyer was designed in a biplane configuration, with a wooden airframe and a wingspan of 12.3 meters, or 40 feet 4 inches. The pilot flew on his stomach on the lower wing, steering by moving a cradle attached to his hips. This cradle pulled wires which warped the wings and turned the rudder. The Wright Flyer 1, based on the previous glider, was set up near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, in the United States of America on December 17, 1903, where there was a hill and a good breeze. The first flight lasted 12 seconds, traveling 36 meters or 120 feet with Orville piloting. 3 more flights were made on that day, with Wilbur achieving the best flight, covering 255.6 meters or 852 feet in 59 seconds. The Wright brothers had made history with the first successful flight of a controllable, self-propelled, heavier-than-air machine.
When planes race down the runway. The pressure difference above and below the wing creates a net upward force, giving the aircraft lift. Once this upward force exceeds gravity's downward pull, you have liftoff. Of course, a 1 million pound plane needs greater lift to get off the ground than a Great Bustard. Planes achieve this with a combination of 2 things. 1. Airplanes race down the runway at 150 to 180 miles per hour, creating fast-moving air across the wings. And 2. Something called the angle of attack. You probably noticed that planes tilt up at liftoff instead of rising parallel to the ground. The reason is that the tilt, also known as the angle of attack, directs more air below the wing. This increases the pressure and gives the plane an extra boost. Once aloft, the main thing keeping the plane in midair isn't magic, it's the engines. Engines propel the plane forward, keeping a steady flow of fast-moving air across the wings. This creates that key difference in air pressure that supports the plane's weight against gravity. But as you fly higher, the air becomes thinner, so the plane must travel faster to maintain that lift. While liftoff speed is around 170 miles per hour at sea level, a commercial airliner's cruising speed is around 550 miles per hour at 40,000 feet.
Frequent flyer types are probably used to it, but the fact is, when we travel by air, we are way up there. The average cruising altitude of a commercial jet is 7.5 to 11 kilometers. In horizontal terms, that is at least as far as the average distance between you and the nearest Starbucks at any given moment. In vertical terms, well, that's a long way down. The good news is if the plane starts to fall, it has a long time to figure out how to stop falling. But we've been flying that high ever since the development of the jet engine in the mid-1950s. And jets were designed to fly at these high altitudes because there's less air up there, and that's what engineers, passengers, and airlines all prefer. Basically, there are far fewer air molecules at say, 30,000 feet or 9 kilometers than at sea level, so the plane is literally running into fewer molecules. This means it doesn't have to produce as much thrust in order to maintain the speed necessary to fly. So it can travel more efficiently, which is what the airlines want. What the passengers want is to not feel like they're flying in the air at all, and flying at higher altitudes means being able to fly over at least some of the weather patterns and air currents that older, less powerful propeller planes often had to fly through. So flying higher usually means a more comfortable flight. But there are some trade-offs for this efficiency and comfort. In order to stay in the air and
T8D. The Concorde, using the zero-bypass Rolls-Royce Snecma Olympus 593, burned 46.85 pounds of fuel per mile flown, while the 787 Dreamliner, using the 10-to-1 bypass ratio General Electric Gen X, uses 18.7 pounds per mile. But the Concorde was a tiny airplane, even compared to the modestly sized 787. It seated only 100 passengers, compared to 291 on the Dreamliner. That means that the per-person fuel economy on the Concorde was just about 14 miles per gallon, compared to 104 miles per gallon on the Dreamliner. In the end, Air France and British Airways, the only two Concorde operators, could not afford to keep flying the plane. Less than 1/3 of the seats were actually occupied by paying customers. Others were filled by those using miles or those upgraded from first class on normal flights. After all, it cost at a minimum $7,500 of today's dollars to fly one way from London to New York in those 3 hours, and that was to fly in seats that looked like this. Not all that different than the economy seats of today. When the Concorde started flying, first class on other planes looked like this. While nice, these seats were just larger economy class seats, and it wasn't incredibly easy to sleep in them. By the time the Concorde stopped flying in 2003, first class looked like this, and the seats went fully flat into a bed. Many chose to spend a little less, past 7 hours in this, rather than spending 3 hours in these cramped seats. British Airways even introduced the first fully flat business class seat in 2000. So for significantly less money than the Concorde, travelers could cross the Atlantic sleeping horizontally. This just wasn't luxury anymore. The whole idea of the Concorde was to create the most efficient way to cross the Atlantic for the business traveler. But with fully flat beds, those traveling towards Europe could leave the US in the evening, get their night's sleep on the plane, and wake up in Europe, essentially wasting no time. No longer luxurious or efficient, the Concorde flew its final commercial flight on October 24, 2003, thereby ending the era of commercial supersonic flight. Here's the thing about flying. Speed really doesn't matter to airlines. It really only exists as a selling point for the consumer. The cost of the airplane is a relatively small part of the overall cost to fly, so you'll never see an airline fly faster so they can use their planes more. Planes' lifespans are generally rated in cycles, the number of times the plane takes off and lands. The Dreamliner is rated for 44,000 cycles and has a list price, which is often much higher than the actual sale price, of $224.6 million. That means that the cost of the airplane per flight is barely over $5,000, while the fuel cost for a flight from New York to London is well over $15,000. Therefore, airlines always just fly their airplanes at the most fuel-efficient speed. It turns out that that speed is just about always between 500 and 550 miles per hour. What's weird about this is that it's well below the speed of sound, 700.
To make air move faster over the top of the wings. When air moves faster, the pressure of the air decreases. So the pressure on top of the wings is less than the pressure on the bottom of the wings. The difference in pressure creates a force on the wings that lifts the wings up into the air. faster over the top of the wing, so the pressure of the air decreases. So the pressure of the top of the wing is less than the bottom of the wing. The difference in pressure creates a force that lifts the wings up into the air.
There are four forces affecting an aircraft. One of these forces is the weight pulling the aircraft downward from its center of gravity. The force meeting the weight and pulling the aircraft upward is called lift. Wings produce lift force. If the weight is more than the lift, the aircraft loses altitude. If the lift is more than the weight, the aircraft climbs. If both are equal, the aircraft continues to fly in a constant altitude. Another force affecting an aircraft is thrust. It pushes the aircraft forward, and it is produced by the engines. Thrust is produced as a result of a process when fuel and gas burned in jet engines is pushed out through the exhaust of the engine. The force opposing the thrust force and trying to slow down the aircraft is called drag. Drag consists of the combination of elements of air resistance on the body of the aircraft and the slowing effect of the air blowing in the opposite direction. Here, the rules are as follows. If the thrust is more than the drag, the aircraft gets faster. If the drag is more than the thrust, the aircraft gets slower. If thrust is equal to drag,